Welcome to Reach the World ASAP. I'm Pastor Scott Griswold working with ASAP Ministries. Dressed a little different tonight because I'm talking about Myanmar. We'll get to that in a little bit, but this is something friends there gave to me when I visited there several times. And I've even got the wraparound skirt on. A little bit hard to wear the first time. I was glad it stayed up. Anyway, it's a fun country. I love visiting there. The food is delicious. The people so gracious. I still only speak 2 words. So, Mingalaba and Jesu Tamare. Hello and thank you. Glad to have you joining with me this time. I want you to picture with me a night at the symphony. Everybody's seated. The audience waits in anticipation. The members of the orchestra have carefully tuned up, and they are poised with instruments in hand. The conductor lifts his baton, then brings it down. Strings glide through their parts in perfect harmony. The French horns add their mellow but powerful tones. The music builds to the part in the piece where there's a glorious violin solo. But at that moment, there's nothing but silence. The conductor drops his baton and stares. The place where the solo should stand is completely empty. Disappointment floods the entire hall. Somebody terribly important is missing. This description depicts our world. God is the master conductor of the universe. Carefully, he works every day to put together a symphony of music that will echo throughout eternity. He recruits, he trains musicians from every corner of the world. Why? Because our words, our songs of praise, they delight his heart. He made us to know him, to love him. God's ear is so tuned that he can hear each person and every language. He takes in the lovely strains of a Spanish solo while also soaking up a powerful choir thundering in Swahili. However, at this very moment, he also hears specific blocks of stark silence. They're smashing the beauty of his masterpiece. Emptiness is the silence of hundreds of languages from around the world in which no one is praying or praising. Why? Because nobody has ever introduced them to the song of the Lamb. Take the country of Myanmar, for example. It was previously known as Burma. Mission work has been happening there for many, many years. Most likely you know the story of Adoniram Judson, a Baptist missionary who dedicated himself to Burma for almost 40 years in the 1800s. Many of you also know the story of Eric B. Hare, who served as a missionary to Myanmar, especially among the Karen people from 1915 to 1934. His amazing stories really delighted children and adults for years. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church alone in Myanmar, after more than 100 years of mission service, over 27,000 people have become Christians. That sounds really good. But what is the true state of the unreached peoples in Myanmar? In the various times I've visited this special country, I've learned that the majority of Seventh-day Adventist Christians are among just 2 tribes, the Karen and the Chin. In fact, the Joshua Project says that there are 155 people groups with basically their own language in that country, have their own culture, but 52 of them are unreached. That means there's no significant Christian witness among them at all. That's a huge amount of people. In fact, if you look at the numbers, it's even more sobering. More than 40 million of the 52 million people in the country are unreached, with about 80% being Buddhist, while others are Muslim or animist. So who are these people? What are they like? Well, I can't tell you about 52 totally different groups, but let me just mention 3. We usually think of Buddhists in Myanmar, but there are Muslims too. On the border with India and Bangladesh, there are about 886,000 Rohingya living in the Rakhine state. There's rushing streams that plunge over waterfalls between the majestic mountains, goes down through gorgeous jungles, and finally ends up at perfect ocean beaches. This area has been conquered and ruled by Hindus, Muslims, and finally Buddhists about the time the United States became a country. 100% of the people in that area, the Rohingya, are Muslims, with no known Christians among them at all. They're often persecuted, highly pressured by the Buddhist government. It's pretty serious there. Who will help these Muslims know that Jesus is not only a great prophet, but also their Savior? Then there's the tiny people group called the Chak. These Buddhists live as an isolated tribe of around 2,400 people in the mountains between Myanmar and Bangladesh, near the ruins of an ancient kingdom. Who would care enough to learn the language for just so few? Perhaps we need more of that inspiration that Jesus would have died just for one. And then there are the Shan. 4 million people, 99.1% Buddhist. These people are farmers, planting rice, soybeans, peanuts, coffee. They also grow 50% of the world's illegal opium. In 1948, Burma gained its independence from England. At some point, they changed the name to Myanmar because Burma was the name of the majority people group, the Burmese, and they wanted to be inclusive, bringing all 150-something tribes together. However, the Shan people, along with other tribes, tried to break away from the Burmese and form their own countries because they didn't see equality coming their way. There has been fighting for decades. Many farmers have to hire workers for their fields because their sons are either dead from the fighting, have become conscripted to become soldiers for the Burmese, or have fled to Thailand to become common laborers. This is a place that needs the gospel. There you have it. A tiny description about 3 of the 52 unreached people groups in Myanmar. What can we possibly do? I'm excited to tell you that in the last 5 years, ASAP Ministries has supported 9 church planters to begin work in that Shan state. I want to tell you a bit about one of them. We'll call the worker Naing Soe, because I don't want to get him in trouble by using his real name. You see, he's sharing the gospel among the Shan State Army, which is a rebel group. Naing Soe grew up in a Christian home. When he learned the truth about the Sabbath and the soon coming of Jesus, he decided to become a Seventh-day Adventist. It was not easy because it meant giving up his job since they wouldn't let him take off Saturday. He married a young lady who also had to be brave because as a Christian, well, her entire family were animists who worshiped spirits. Naing Soe was Chin, but he could only speak Burmese, and she was Shan, from the rebel people group who hate to speak Burmese. Well, quite a combination, but God had brought them together for a reason. He knew the Shan needed the everlasting gospel. One day, one of the rebel army officers was passing through the village where they lived. Seemingly out of the blue, he asked Naing Soe to serve as a teacher and a pastor among his rebel army group. Maybe it was because his wife was from that area. It was an amazing opportunity, but a scary one too. Earlier, Naing Soe had been caught by the rebel soldiers. They'd put a gun to his head because he couldn't speak Shan. They were sure he was a spy for the Burmese government. God used the pleading of the village chief to save him. But it could happen again. He knew 2 Burmese teachers who had recently been shot. Still, he decided to go. Who else would take the end-time message to these soldiers and their children? In that new village, he began to share God's love. Here's how he describes it. What the people need most is education. At the same time, I'm teaching the gospel. This is the way in. If I never lived there in the village and helped the children, they'd never be open to evangelistic work. They're learning to trust me with healing their sicknesses. They have no education. They cannot read or go anywhere. They know almost nothing about health principles. I teach them also about family matters too, how to deal with their children. They often divorce in this area. They get married at 12 or 13, and by 16 to 18 years old, they've already divorced 2 or 3 times. They do not know how to have good relationships. His wife helps a lot. She translates for him. She feeds all the many visitors who come through their house. What a huge help she is. People are truly interested in his work. He doesn't teach school on Saturday, so they ask about that. He doesn't smoke, drink, or use betel nuts, so they say this is a real, sincere Christian. Because his house and his heart is wide open to visitors, they feel relaxed and can ask him questions. Now, whenever there's a housewarming, a funeral, a child dedication, they ask him to come and perform the ceremony. God is answering his prayers. He prayed that 8 people would be baptized through an evangelistic series he was involved in. A team from the mission traveled a day and a half from the main city to lead the meetings in this remote place. Exactly 8 people were baptized. Still, it's not easy. Many of the new members have already moved away because they're so poor. They're searching for jobs. The local animist priest has pressured other villagers to not join. Naing Soe feels like he has to start all over, but he's committed. After all, if he doesn't take the gospel to this unreached people group, who will? I'm really excited about what God is doing in Myanmar, and yet there's still so much to do. At the beginning, we said God is the master conductor of the universe. He's recruiting members from every kindred, tribe, and tongue to blend them into an orchestration of incomparable beauty. This choir will be his family for eternity. He's promised in Revelation 7, verse 9, I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. It will happen. But he's waiting for his people to arise and go recruit the final members. Will you do that? I would like to suggest 3 things that we can do. Number 1, pray. Do you really believe that you can help finish the work by your prayers? On one of my visits to Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, I went with Pastor Rick McEdward, who was then the Global Mission Director for the Southern Asia Pacific Division. We met with conference and union leaders. We laid out the different tribes there so we could see them together. And they looked carefully to see which tribes were in their territories and talked about whether or not there were any Christians among them. Then we asked them to each select 2 tribes and pray for them until there was a Christian witness among them. When the meetings were over, Rick and I returned to our homes. For a long time, we heard nothing about the results of those meetings. Then one day, I met up with the president of the Myanmar Union Mission. He was so excited to see me. Why? He said, do you remember when you asked us to pray for 2 tribes? He told me the 2 tribes, then pulled out pictures and said, we've begun work in those 2 tribes. We have baptized members there now. Isn't that exciting? More members for God's great symphony. So, if you want to pray for unreached people groups, there are 2 websites that will help you know where the unreached people primarily are. These websites are joshuaproject.net and operationworld.org. You can learn so much from these 2 sites. You can also buy a book called Operation World and read it with your family. By the end of 1 year, you will know about and have prayed for every country in the world. Ask God to put one specific people group on your heart to pray for until they are reached. That's what we did, and that's how we ended up in Cambodia. Number 2, sponsor a national missionary. There are many places where a local worker like Naing Soe can work for his own people or an unreached people group nearby. It only takes around $160 a month to support such a local worker, and the results are tremendous. An American was recently supporting 4 workers through ASAP. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful? But he ended up having to change jobs, and now he has a lower salary, so he had to stop supporting 2 of those national missionaries. We just looked at our records while I was working on this story and found out that one of them is Naing Soe. So, will you take him up? We would love to support 1,000 church planters and medical missionaries in Myanmar, where we now support 27. Number 3, go. At the very top of Adventist Frontier Mission's list of opportunities is the call to be a church planter among the Pama Buddhists. This is the majority group of Myanmar that I haven't even talked about today. More than 28 million people, and most of them are Buddhists. The country is opening up to outside workers. This call has been sitting there most of the time I was a missionary in Thailand. The General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists also had a call for a full salaried call for a missionary in Myanmar. Nobody took it. Why not? Why not you now? You can even start today locally, because there's a good chance that some people from Myanmar have moved into your neighborhood or somewhere close by in the last 9 years. 73,000 refugees just came from Myanmar since 2005. That's just the United States, other places too. These are minority tribes like the Karen, the Chin, the Shan, the Karenni, the Mon, and on it goes. You can go to them. To know more how to do that, just go to our website, reachtheworldnextdoor.com, and you can learn how. So there it is. Pray, sponsor, go. For the joy of our master conductor, let's reach the world ASAP.